Time for the story. It's a fast-paced service today. Okay, so our Time for All Ages comes from my friend and colleague, Margaret Rogers, who serves the Northlake UU congregation in Kincaid, I think, in Washington State. She's a lovely person, if you ever meet her. And she tells a version of the story of the Little Red Hen. Who knows the story of the Little Red Hen? You know the story of the Little Red Hen? So the Little Red Hen, if you don't remember, she wanted to bake some bread, right? And she went around to the other animals, and she asked them if they would help her bake the bread. And she went to like one animal and said, will you help me plant the wheat? And she went to one animal and said, will you help me harvest the wheat? And she went to another animal and said, like, will you help me bake the bread or grind the wheat or whatever? She went to all the different animals and asked them different things. And what did all the animals say to her? No, nobody wanted to help her. And then when the bread was hot and ready to eat, what did all the animals want to do? They wanted to eat the bread. And then what did the Little Red Hen say to all the animals? No, you cannot eat my bread. And so at the end of the story, the Little Red Hen was eating the bread, and all the other animals were sitting there wanting to eat the bread, and they were sad. And the Little Red Hen, I mean, she had bread, but she wasn't really satisfied. Like, she didn't have any helpers. So, like, it wasn't a happy ending to the story, right? Nobody was really satisfied. And there are plenty of stories that don't have happy endings. I like a lot of stories that don't have happy endings. But I think, and my friend Margaret thinks, that this story could have had a happier ending. And maybe we could come up with a happier ending to the story of the Little Red Hen. Maybe if the Little Red Hen had implemented some shared leadership, some community leadership in her bread-making endeavors, we could come up with a happier ending to this story. So what do you think the Little Red Hen could have done differently? What do you think? So just shout it out. Shout out some ideas. I see some raised hands, but we're just shouting today. Just shout out some ideas. Delegating, okay. Cooperating, I heard a committee. Committees are good, okay. Very UU, I love this. What else? What else? Stating consequences before they happen. That was from a mom. I love that. What else? You have to yell it loud so I can hear.
Let's start out with who wants bread?
Who wants bread? So sharing your vision. So instead of, well, you do this and you do this and you do this, sharing a vision, trying to get people on board. So what if, because it could have been that all the animals, maybe they didn't want bread. Maybe they wanted scones or muffins or crumpets. Who knows? So if the Little Red Hen had gone to all the animals and said, hey, I want to bake something. Is anybody on board? And the animals were like, well, maybe, maybe not. And they all kind of agreed. And maybe they did agree to make bread. And so then the animals could have decided collectively, yes, we're going to make bread. And then they would have had to decide, are we going to make challah, or are we going to make raisin bread, or are we going to make sourdough? And they would have decided that. And then they would have a shared vision. And once they have a shared vision, all of them together, then it would have been a lot easier to get all of the animals on board with what each animal group would do. And so then the different animal groups could have broken up for the different tasks. And you could have had the animals that were good at different things picking the different things they would want to do. So for example, the animals that are good at gardening, like rabbits. What are other animals good at gardening? Groundhogs. I don't know, earthworms. They would have planted the wheat, right? And maybe other animals that aren't so good at gardening, like horses, they might have wanted to try their hand or hoof at gardening too, because sometimes when you're doing a volunteer job, it's nice to try something you're not so good at, because it's a nice opportunity to do that. So maybe the horses would have tried out the gardening.
Margaret said the horses could have offered manure.
Yes, that's true too. That's good. Horses are good at that. Horses could offer to fertilize the garden. That is true. That's a good suggestion, Margaret. They are good at gardening in that way. So the horses could have offered that. So, and then the animals that are good at, I don't know, finding recipes could have done that. Animals that are good at building, like beavers, spiders, other animals good at building, could have built the oven. And together the animals would have decided what they liked to do, and they would have collectively worked to bake the bread. And when it was time to sit down and eat the bread, all the animals would have worked together. No one would have been hungry. No one would have been sad. And it would have been a happy ending to the story of the Little Red Hen. Thank you for listening to my story today.